love that music. And I didn't even get to pick it out. The studio picked it out for us. You're listening to the Human Resource. I've got an interesting topic for you today. You know, as a HR consultant, I am traveling from company to company, and a lot of the organizations that I'm working with they're aware that HR is important, but they don't necessarily understand the depth of it. So the next couple of shows, I'm hoping to kind of give you a stronger understanding of why HR is something that you need to be aware of, and all the little things that sometimes get slipped between the cracks. Now today, I'm going to talk about an element of one of my audits that I work with HR people on, and that's the maintenance and record keeping of employee information. Now, the first thing that comes to your mind, I'm sure, is, well, we keep the personnel files. But if you've been watching the show or listening to the show, you've heard me reference that the Department of Labor alone wants you to have at least 14 different pieces of information on every employee. Now, this is W-2. They are real employees. And they don't have any set methodology on how you keep this information. And what's interesting is that everyone tends to have the information and not even realize that they're meeting the requirement, and it tends to be scattered hither, thither, and yon. One of my favorite stories is a gentleman who gave me a call. He had read one of my articles in a publication that I had published, and he called me and goes, I think I need you. I've got employees, I've got information on them, but I don't know that I'm really handling this correctly. I said, oh, no problem. He says, meet me at this restaurant. I'll explain more then. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden this gentleman comes walking up to me with this shoebox, and it's just overflowing with loose papers. Well, do I need to go any further? Those were his personnel files. And God love him. He just looked at me and he goes, I know this doesn't look very good. I said, well, here's what we're going to do. Let's find out what you've got, and then let's find out what's missing. And in this process, when I'm working with companies, I always find an opportunity to help them better understand the importance of this kind of information, employee information of any kind now, of any kind. And what I tend to surprise people with is that there's actually 5 different files or 5 different places that you really should maintain employee information. And this is just your typical average W-2 employee can actually have 5 different places where their information is kept. Maybe actually even more, but we can talk about that. So let's go for the first one. The personnel file. Everybody knows a personnel file. And believe it or not, there's very strict restrictions and guidelines on what can actually be kept in a personnel file. And this is basic information. Obviously, the employment application and performance reviews, maybe even corrective actions. But that personnel file is pretty much the history and the life, the story of this employee while they've been employed with you. However, the second place you're going to have employee information is an I-9 binder or an I-9 file. Now, to refresh your memory, the I-9 is actually one of the documents taken during onboarding within the first 3 days of employment. The employee fills it out first page on day 1 or prior. Page 2, the employer fills it out and completes by day 3 of the employee's first week. Now, this document is not overseen by the Department of Labor. In fact, this document is overseen by the Department of Homeland Security. Now, that's important because when the Department of Labor possibly comes in and wants to audit the documents in a personnel file, they don't have jurisdiction. over the I-9 and vice versa. If the I-9s are being investigated or if they're being audited, they don't have jurisdiction over the documents that the Department of Labor would oversee, such as the personnel file. So those are your very first two files. And again, the I-9 can be a binder. You can just have a bunch of dividers in there with the alphabet and just slide them in there for the duration of the employment of that individual. Both have to be locked and secured. So let's add that on top of, you have them separate, but they both have to be locked and secured. One of the most common questions about this information is, can they be kept in the same filing cabinet? Can they be kept in proximity of each other? And absolutely, you can keep them as long as they are separate. Now, there's nothing illegal about putting them in the personnel file, but from an efficiency standpoint, if you get audited or if somebody asks to review based on a legal reason the personnel file or the I-9, do you really want to be in there sorting out all those sheets of paper or all those documents? Probably not. So start out the most efficient way at the very beginning during onboarding by starting a personnel file and then filing the I-9 in a separate place. Your third file that you can maintain on an employee would be a medical file. Now, there's a lot of confusion around medical files because when I say that, everyone's minds all instantly go to HIPAA. But guys, actually, a medical file is for non-work-related incidences or activities around medical conditions or services, and they're between, most hopefully, they're between the employee and you. So the employee is providing this information to you on non-work-related situations. The idea behind keeping medical information separate from the personnel file is that what is the likelihood that if someone went to look at a personnel file, a supervisor, a manager, or a team lead, who wanted to know the history or the past performance or experiences of an employee, they run across a medical form that says that they had a back injury and had some back surgery from playing basketball in the backyard, or they fell skiing and were injured, and all of a sudden now they've got this in their head and they decide, oh, that individual, for medical reasons, can't possibly do the job I'm going to have them do. And they're discriminating against them for medical reasons. Whether they intend to or not, that can't happen if we have all the medical information or medical history on non-work-related injuries or incidences in a medical file. Now, I would even put return to work forms and slips in a medical file. I tend to even take medical slips for parents who go and with their children and have their children reviewed for medical reasons. Sometimes the doctors will say, oh, here's a return to work slip, and I tend to put those in the medical file. Because again, I don't want anybody seeing that and then all of a sudden deciding, oh, well, they've got a child that needs therapy, or they've got a child that's autistic, or oh, they've got a child that has cancer. I have to use that in my decision-making process, and that's illegal. So your medical files are extremely important. And again, let's add one more. Here's your third file. Medical files need to be locked. And these I tend to put, they can be in close proximity, but I wouldn't put them anywhere close to individuals who don't have a need to know that individual's medical background. So tuck and hide those. Keep a very limited audience available to those. Because your fourth file is going to be the workers' comp file. These are work-related injuries. And again, for the same reason, we don't want non-work-related injuries to influence decisions on promotions or transfers, raises, maybe even whether we want to, keep them on a layoff or something like that. We want those work-related injuries to be outside of that decision making. And what's really clever about work-related injuries under workers' comp, some of those can go on for years. And those files tend to be very active for individuals who are going in for additional review. In fact, work-related files, workers' comp files, can be kept for up to 30 years if it had anything to do with hazardous materials. So maintaining those files separate in an accessible area is very, very important. So file 4, workers' comp. So you now know the top 4 reasons to have a file on somebody. Can you guess what the 5th one is? This is a file that does not have to be secured or locked. This is a file that doesn't have any confidential information on it. It doesn't require social security numbers. It doesn't have anything to do with their address. The 5th file, a training file. I love and encourage companies to keep a training file. And let's think about this. If you're a warehouse, a logistics company, if you're a manufacturing company, there's a tremendous amount of training required for your employees. And in many times, if the individual is injured, and it could be based on a lack of training, you want to be able to get to that information quickly. I had a pharmaceutical company who would be audited periodically by their clients to assure that the individuals that were working on their projects had the licensure, had the education, had the knowledge, the education credentials. And so they would come in periodically and just audit on their own, and I kept all those training files accessible out in the hallway so employees themselves could go in there and add their training certificates if they were getting additional training. IT companies, this is a great idea for IT companies because, again, you might have individuals who are receiving or acquiring additional certifications, which, again, your clients may need to know or be assured that the expertise and the standards and the knowledge that are working on their accounts is at the utmost highest. So training files could even begin with that onboarding process. Did they get the blood pathogen? Did they get slip, trip, and falls? Did they get how to proper lift? But go even further. Did we train them on the exits? Did we train them on fire drills? Did we train them on where to, dispose of particular materials and waste? All of this is extremely important. And again, stuff that is actively researched, especially if it has to do with forklift training or scissor lift training or anything that could really cause serious damage if the training is not occurring. So there's your top 5. Personnel file, I-9s, medical file, workers' comp, and then training. Now, for those of you who have anything to do with the trucking, transportation industry, yes, you're going to have a 6th file, and you're going to have paperwork, documents, and records that are required exclusively by the Department of Transportation. And those should be kept separate even further down the road. In fact, many of you, I would recommend making sure that you've got somebody who's a specialist in DOT record keeping, because you can't fool around with that. And again, there are so many different things that you have to follow up on. Those records need to be kept in absolutely pristine condition. But what about records that can be kept electronic? If you can, I would highly recommend keep your drug test results, keep your background check results, keep employee benefit enrollment forms. Keep those electronic if you can. There's no reason to print that out on paper when the individuals who have a need to know that information is so limited that it's just not something you need to have out and accessible all the time. So there you go. if you employ 2 people, I just gave you a really good lead on just how complicated or maybe as easy it is to maintain their records. My name is Pandy, and I hope this helped. Come see us again, because you've been listening to the Human Resource.